दोस्तों पेप्सी और कोका कोला के बारे में आप सबको पता ही होगा और ज्यादातर चीजें जो हम इनके बारे में रिसर्च करते हैं या पढ़ते हैं या फिर देखते हैं इज अराउंड द मार्केटिंग कैंपेन्स। बट अगर आप बिजनेस पर्सपेक्टिव से सोचते हैं तो मार्केटिंग इज जस्ट वन ऑफ द एस्पेक्ट्स ऑफ डूइंग द बिजनेस, इज वन ऑफ द कस्टमर एक्विजिशन स्ट्रेटेजी, जहाँ पे पोजिशनिंग अपनी चेंज करते हैं तो थोड़ा थोड़ा डिपेंडिंग ऑन व्हाट यू वांट द कंज्यूमर टू थिंक अबाउट योर प्रोडक्ट। आज हम ट्राई कर रहे हैं समझने की अबाउट द decisions which made Pepsi and Coca-Cola. We are going to look at the origins of Pepsi and Coke. कैसे चालू हुआ, किसने चालू किया, कंपनी कैसे ग्रो हुई, दोनों के बीच में लड़ाइयाँ कैसे हुई, मार्केट्स कैसे करके डिफाइन हुए, जो सीईओज और सीएक्सओज बैठे हुए थे उनकी कंपनी के टॉप पे, उन्होंने क्या डिसीजंस लिए, जिस कारण से ये दोनों कंपनियां जो कि आई थिंक 1800s में चालू हुई थी, आज 150 साल के बाद भी हमारी जिंदगी में उतने ही रेलेवेंट और उतनी ही एफर्विसेंट है।
The soft drink industry is a $100 billion international juggernaut. The Coca-Cola Company and PepsiCo control vast empires which reach into practically every corner of the globe. Through huge networks of bottlers, distributors, and retailers, there's hardly a spot on earth where you can't quench your thirst with a Coke or a Pepsi. So heavily promoted, their presence is practically inescapable. Coke and Pepsi are twin icons of American culture. Such everyday familiar symbols that a time before their existence is almost unfathomable. It was 1886, the height of the Gilded Age. The Civil War was over, and America was hurtling headlong into the modern age. Electric lights hummed, Victrolas cranked out vaudeville tunes, horseless carriages sputtered to life, and the first skyscrapers thrust toward the sky. Against this backdrop, this whirling kaleidoscope where everything was fresh, new, and bubbling over with fervent energy, the world's most famous trademark was born, launched with a tiny advertisement in the Atlanta newspaper. Coca-Cola was created by an Atlanta pharmacy owner named John Doc Pemberton. Pemberton was no doctor.
1886, that makes this what 150-year-old company. लोग कहते हैं कि 100 साल के कंपनीज बनानी बहुत मुश्किल होती हैं. There are very rare companies which exist till that time. अगर आप अपने आसपास देखोगे ज्यादातर जो ब्रांड्स आपको दिख रहे हैं वो किसी न किसी 100 साल पुरानी कंपनी का ही पार्ट होंगे, और अगर वो किसी 100 साल पुरानी कंपनी का पार्ट ना भी हो तो शायद किसी न किसी 100 साल पुरानी कंपनी के merged entity के पार्ट होंगे in some form or the other. I think Coca-Cola, Pepsi, they have basically shaped the whole generation, and not generation, generations in not just one country but multiple countries. इसीलिए ये डॉक्यूमेंट्री तो इंटरेस्टिंग हो जाती है, और इसीलिए मैंने इस डॉक्यूमेंट्री को आज चूज किया, बिकॉज मुझे लगता है कि इफ यू रियली वांट टू लर्न हाउ टू डू गुड बिजनेस, लेट्स लर्न फ्रॉम द बेस्ट एंड लेट्स सी हाउ कोका-कोला इवॉल्व्ड, हाउ पेप्सी केम इन, एंड व्हाट इज दिस कोक वर्सेस पेप्सी वॉर.
He just purchased a $5 medical license and started calling himself Doc. A visit to Doc Pemberton usually included a vapor bath and a forcible cleansing of the digestive system. He believed you could cure all. Coca-Cola, this whirling kaleidoscope where everything was fresh, new, and bubbling over with fervent energy, the world's most famous trademark was born, launched with a tiny advertisement in the Atlanta newspaper. Coca-Cola was created by an Atlanta pharmacy owner named John Doc Pemberton. Pemberton was no doctor. He just purchased a $5 medical license and started calling himself Doc. A visit to Doc Pemberton usually included a vapor bath and a forcible cleansing of the digestive system.
He believed you could cure all human ills by, in fact, drinking poisons and purging your body.
The 1880s were the heyday of miracle cures and patent medicines. Store shelves were crammed with a bewildering array of elixirs and tonics of dubious reliability. Pemberton's own concoctions included triplex liver pills and compound extract of Stilengia, Dr. Sanford's Great Invigorator, and Eureka Oil. Federal regulation of food and drugs was years away, and for the patent medicine business, the sky was the limit.
You could concoct any sort of vile potion and claim all sorts of miraculous cures for it and sell it.
Most patent medicines contained copious amounts of alcohol or even stronger drugs, often both. Laudanum, a popular painkiller, was a mixture of opium and alcohol. Others contained powerful doses.
Opium and alcohol. Wow. And that's a deadly concoction. इस बंदे ने कोका कोला क्रिएट किया है जो ओपियम एंड अल्कोहल के मिक्सचर को बेचा करता था.
Of what was in 1886 the latest wonder drug, cocaine. Both. Laudanum, a popular painkiller, was a mixture of opium and alcohol. Others contained powerful doses of what was in 1886 the latest wonder drug, cocaine. Cocaine had been relatively unknown in America until 1884, when former President and Civil War hero Ulysses S. Grant was stricken with throat cancer and was prescribed cocaine by his doctor.
Graham was dying and gained relief from his suffering by the use of cocaine, which was in turn publicized, and he was probably the most famous and popular figure in the country at that point. So a lot of people had reason to think that cocaine was a good thing.
And Doc Pemberton was one of those people. Among his early products was a concoction called French wine coca.
Pemberton used cocaine and caffeine in several of his early creations. His most successful one before he turned to Coca-Cola was a combination of wine, which of course is alcohol, with cocaine and caffeine in it.
French wine coca was an immediate hit, but its success was short-lived. Months after the potent mixture hit drugstore shelves, French wine coca's main ingredient was outlawed. It wasn't the cocaine, it was the wine.
In 1885, Atlanta voted to go dry. Pemberton panicked because his French wine coca had just come out in 1885. It was doing real well, and he thought, what am I going to do if they make this illegal?
What he did was get out of the patent medicine business and into the soft drink business. There were 5 immensely popular soda fountains in Atlanta that offered cool refreshment from the city's blistering summer heat. Pemberton wanted a beverage that would sell at these popular fountains.
These huge soda fountains that were like palaces of onyx and marble with gorgeous accoutrements, and they would create 300 different soft drinks at one soda fountain. And so there was this immense competition.
With soft drinks like Hires Root Beer and White Rock Ginger Ale already successful, Pemberton's challenge was to transform his wine and cocaine mixture into a soft drink. What he came up with was anything but soft, thanks to heavy doses of cocaine and another stimulant, extractive cola. Cola, spelled with a K, was a nut native to West Africa. Its active ingredient was nothing more than caffeine. Pemberton merely combined 2 popular stimulants in a single cold beverage that, since it contained no alcohol, could be sold at soda fountains.
Pemberton tinkered.
So soda fountains was the place where they used to sell it, and Coca-Cola was actually cocaine and caffeine.
With the French wine coca formula to try to take out the alcohol. And he added a bunch of sugar, he added some acid, and basically he came up with Coca-Cola.
And it was Pemberton's bookkeeper, Frank Robinson, who came up with the name.
Frank Robinson had the inspiration to think of the name Coca-Cola because he liked the way it sounded, and he changed the spelling of cola from beginning with a K to a C.
Besides a memorable name, Robinson also supplied the trademark, spending months perfecting the flowing script.
He had a bookkeeper's ability to write beautiful Spencerian script, and that's actually his handwriting that became the trademark that's familiar all around the world today.
But what would become the world's most recognized brand name almost failed in its first.
उसके फाइनेंस के बंदे ने उसको लोगो बना करके दिया है. That means that inspiration can come from anywhere, and the best of things might have the most weirdest of origins.
With the French wine coca formula to try to take out the alcohol. And he added a bunch of sugar, he added some acid, and basically he came up with Coca-Cola.
And it was Pemberton's bookkeeper, Frank Robinson, who came up with the name.
Frank Robinson had the inspiration to think of the name Coca-Cola because he liked the way it sounded, and he changed the spelling of cola from beginning with a K to a C.
Besides a memorable name, Robinson also supplied the trademark, spending months perfecting the flowing script.
He had a bookkeeper's ability to write beautiful Spencerian script, and that's actually his handwriting that became the trademark that's familiar all around the world today.
But what would become the world's most recognized brand name almost failed in its first year.
He was a rotten businessman, and he'd gone bankrupt several times, and he did not want to be a business partner of Doc Pemberton.
Sales were slow. Only 25 gallons of syrup sold the first year. To make matters worse, Pemberton's health was failing. He was suffering from a problem that afflicted many druggists of the day.
He was by this time addicted to cocaine. So this, I would say, contributed to his lack of business acumen. He just was spaced out most of the time.
In the winter of 1888, Pemberton lay dying. It looked as if Coca-Cola might die with him. But that winter, something would happen that would ensure Coke's future. When we return, a splitting headache transforms the failing soft drink into a household word.
The coca plant had been chewed by natives of Peru and Bolivia for over 2,000 years and was reputed to act as a stimulant, aid the digestion, aphrodisiac, and life extender. The cola world will return on Modern Motors.
The busiest, fastest-growing cities in the South. And the same was true back in the 1880s, when it was a place where men of ambition aimed to strike it rich. Among these eager men was a high-strung but determined 21-year-old druggist apprentice from Villa Rica, Georgia, named Asa Candler.
He came to Atlanta with $1.75 in his pocket, like a real-life Horatio Alger, and went around to all the drugstores looking for a job, one of which, by the way, was Pemberton's, who didn't hire him.
Turned down by Pemberton, Candler landed a job at another pharmacist shop. Within 4 years, he was in business for himself.
He was not the creative genius that Pemberton was, and he was not the scholar that Pemberton was, but he was a hustler. He made a lot, he wanted to make money, and he knew how to do it.
Candler's long hours of work paid off, but his success came at a price, excruciating headaches.
He was plainly a very tightly wound man who suffered from headaches from time to time brought on by stress.
Yet Candler's stress was nothing compared to Pemberton's troubles. Flat broke and near death, Coca-Cola's creator offered to sell the business to the young druggist he'd once refused to hire. At first, he wasn't interested, but then Candler, racked by one of his recurring migraines, sampled his first Coke.
He'd tried quite a few different headache remedies, nothing had worked, but he tried Coca-Cola and it seemed to work.
His headache cured, Candler's mind was made up. For $2,300, Candler became the sole proprietor of Coca-Cola in May 1889. Candler's first move was to refine the formula and rid Coca-Cola of its medicinal flavor.
He added more sugar, for example. He added some citric products to mask the taste, to give it a little bit more bite, make it a little bit less sweet because of all the sugar that had to be added.
Beyond Coke's taste, the dour, deeply religious Candler also had serious reservations about the trademark ingredient.
He sent a sample of Coke syrup off to a chemist to find out how much cocaine was actually in it, and the report came back that it was substantial enough to be worrisome. Candler devised a new means of exhausting these coca leaves so that there was no more than an infinitesimal trace of cocaine in his drink.
From that day,
So basically जब शुरुआत में चालू हुई थी तब कोक में एक्चुअली में बहुत ज्यादा कोक था एंड नाउ व्हेन द कंपनी वाज सोल्ड ऑफ उस टाइम पे इस बंदे ने मिक्सचर को चेंज किया, टेस्ट को चेंज किया और कोकेन की क्वांटिटी को कहता ना कि धागा मात्र छोड़ दिया बस.
forward, Coca-Cola would contain only trace amounts of its trademark ingredients.
In a way, Coca-Cola's name is very misleading because there's virtually no coca and virtually no cola in it.
Coca-Cola's potent combination of sugar and caffeine still packed a punch, only now it tasted good too. Frank Robinson, Pemberton's former bookkeeper and now Candler's chief of advertising, once again provided the inspiration to take the product to the next level. He launched a pioneering ad campaign, among the first direct mail campaigns in history.
They would go to the biggest
आप में से कितने लोगों को ये पता है कि Rockefeller was the first person who tried out the D2C model. He was the first person who got petroleum directly to the customer. That was the game changer. That basically made him a household name. That is what made him money. Is the distribution that he was able to create from the D2C model. बहुत interesting है. इसके ऊपर कभी हम शायद किसी और documentary में या किसी और वीडियो में बात करेंगे. But that too is true. And here also the first meal campaigns were done by Coca-Cola.
pharmacist in the town who had a soda fountain, and they would ask him who his best customers were, and they'd get their addresses, and they would mail them free coupons for Coca-Cola.
Driven by Robinson's aggressive advertising, Coca-Cola expanded to soda fountains across the country. Sales jumped to 500,000 gallons of syrup by 1901, roughly 60 million Cokes. America seemed addicted to Coca-Cola. The only problem was that some people began to wonder why.
There were a lot of stories began appearing in various national publications about people who were afflicted with addictions to Coca-Cola and other soft drinks that contain cocaine, and there was an outcry building against it.
In 1906, with public pressure mounting, Candler went back to the laboratory and developed a complicated process that rid the drink of any trace of the drug once and for all.
This beverage, this magic concoction, Coca-Cola, a simple refreshment, advertised now only as a refreshment, having no magic qualities, no health-inducing properties, but just simple refreshment. The success of Atlanta Holy Water, Coca-Cola, was repeated over and over again.
So basically, Coca-Cola से Coke को निकाल दिया गया completely because people were starting to get addicted to it.
Its critics silenced, Coca-Cola's sales continued to climb. Almost all of Coke's sales came from selling syrup to soda fountains. Back then, carbonated drinks were seldom sold in bottles. That all changed in 1899 when the first Coca-Cola bottling plant was set up in nearby Chattanooga. Soon, bottling plants sprang up across the country. Now, it seemed, Coke was everywhere.
Coca-Cola was a pervasive kind of thing. You'd see it on Main Street. You'd see it at your civic club. You'd see it at the high school football game.
Soon others attempted to cash in on Coke's success. With sound-alike names and identical-looking bottles and logos, Coke's competitors had an easy time confusing the drink-buying public. Determined to set his product apart, Candler directed his bottlers to come up with a unique, distinctive package. The result, unveiled in 1916, was so simple, yet so original, it became an American icon.
It was the same everywhere, a universal bottle that even a blind man, when the bottle is placed in his hand, he can feel its contours and know that that is Coca-Cola.
The pains the company took to protect the formula were equaled only by how vigorously Coke defended its name.
Coke militantly protected its trademark against anyone who tried to use a similar name, and they were successful in literally hundreds of infringement suits, and they drove competing Cocas and Colas out of business for years.
If Candler seemed obsessive about protecting his trademark, it was nothing compared to how obsessive he was about protecting the ingredients of Coca-Cola. The only written copy of the formula was kept in a bank vault. And why not? Coca-Cola had made Candler fabulously wealthy.
सो मेरे हिसाब से यूजुअली ये जो फॉर्मूला वाला चक्कर है, यूजुअली एक मार्केटिंग गिमिक है. इट्स अबाउट क्रिएटिंग अ लेगेसी, इट्स अबाउट क्रिएटिंग अ फैमिली, एंड क्लियरली दीस पीपल वर जीनियसेस इन मार्केटिंग. नो वंडर अबाउट इट.
Success that he attributed as much to the taste of Coke as to the marketing and distribution operation he had created. But despite his phenomenal success, Candler was dissatisfied.
I think he felt guilty about the massive wealth he was accumulating selling Coca-Cola. I don't think he thought the product was terribly worthwhile.
In 1919, Candler and his family decided to sell Coca-Cola. Among those interested was a powerful Atlanta banker named Ernest Woodruff.
Almost everybody hated Ernest Woodruff. He was an unpleasant person by all accounts. Although I found this wonderful quote from a contemporary newspaper from around 1919 saying, Ernest Woodruff is not a companionable man, and he has few friends. But when he calls, the dollars come.
Candler did not want to sell his company to a man like Woodruff. So when his family accepted an offer to sell for $25 million, he figured Woodruff was out of the running. He figured wrong.
He was considered a shark and a sharp operator and someone not to be entirely trusted. And Asa Candler in particular would have nothing to do with him. He considered Ernest Woodruff to be an unsavory figure. And so it was a big surprise to Asa Candler when he found out who had actually bought Coca-Cola.
Woodruff wanted Coca-Cola merely as an investment. He had no real interest in running the company. In 1923, Woodruff turned Coca-Cola over to his 33-year-old son, Robert.
The story goes that Robert took the job with the explicit understanding that his father would not be countermanding everything he did, would not be looking over his shoulder, that he would really be the boss of the company. And indeed, he became known as the boss. That was his nickname.
Unlike his father, Robert was very interested in running the company. He oversaw virtually every facet of the operation, from production to marketing. But he overlooked one small detail. When we return, Coca-Cola bungles the chance to crush a struggling upstart challenger that would one day emerge as Coke's greatest nemesis. Fortune was made in the bustling. While Coca-Cola's fortune was made in the bustling metropolis of Atlanta, Pepsi-Cola originated in a more remote location. It was created in 1898 in New Bern, North Carolina, by a pharmacist named Caleb Bradham.
Caleb,
ये सारे कोक पेप्सी सारे फार्मासिस्ट लोग बनाया करते थे, नहीं? But this also goes on to show कि जमाने की हर जनरेशन में ना एक वैसा एक मास जॉब होता है जो कि सारे लोग एस्पायर करते हैं करने को. मेरे ख्याल से 1800s के टाइम में साइंस वाज बेसिकली द होल थिंग. सो यू सी सो मेनी पीपल ट्राइंग टू बिकम साइंटिस्ट एंड फार्मासिस्ट एंड ट्रैवलर्स. एंड उस टाइम का जमाना ही कुछ और हुआ करता है. हम जब छोटे हुआ करते थे तब डॉक्टर्स एंड इंजीनियर्स एटलीस्ट इन इंडिया हुआ करता था. अभी नाउ थिंग्स हैव अगेन चेंज्ड. पीपल वांट टू बी इन्फ्लुएंसर्स एंड यूट्यूबर्स, एंड नाउ द थिंग्स आर अ लिटिल बिट मोर इन अ फ्लक्स. बट टेक्निकली ऑल दीज पेप्सीज एंड द कोक्स एंड ऑल द जूसेस were made by pharmacists.
Was a druggist, a pharmacist who liked to fool around in a soda fountain and came up with a drink at that time was called Brad's drink, very popular in New Bern.
Marketed for its supposed medicinal qualities, Pepsi's patent medicine origins were similar to Coke's, with one noted exception.
rather than Coca-Cola, which was created as a medicine, Pepsi was essentially meant to be a drink from the very first, as a refreshing pepper-upper, and certainly with caffeine that was in it from the cola nut, it would do that.
In 1902, Bradham renamed Brad's drink Pepsi-Cola. And just like Coca-Cola, the name was misleading.
Bradham used the name cola from the popularity of cola at that time, and he combined that with pepsin, which aids digestion. And that was one of the early advertising claims of Pepsi-Cola, that it did aid digestion, although Pepsi never had any pepsin in it.
By 1907, Pepsi was selling 100,000 gallons of syrup a year. Less than 10 years later, Bradham's budding Pepsi empire had grown to nearly 300 bottling operations in 24 states.
It became an instant success. By about 1910, Pepsi-Cola was being sold throughout North and South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Alabama, so it had done very well very quickly.
Then, in the midst of World War I, disaster struck. Sugar prices shot up dramatically. To keep Pepsi flowing into the nation's soda fountains, Bradham took a huge gamble.
Bradham decided to bite the bullet and order a lot of sugar and buy sugar futures at the high price because he thought it would go higher. Unfortunately, the price of sugar dropped from 22 cents down to below 3 cents a pound, again almost overnight, and the Pepsi-Cola company was simply ruined.
Ruined and out of business. With his company shut down, Bradham returned to his drugstore. The Pepsi story would have ended then and there if it weren't for a blunder by Coca-Cola. After the war and aided by Prohibition, Coca-Cola's sales skyrocketed, reaching $23 million in 1923. With the bars shut down, soda fountains did a booming business that not even the Great Depression could dent. According to Barron's magazine, that merry symphony of nickels and dimes rolling into myriad cash registers across the nation and eventually into the Coca-Cola company's treasury has meant a remarkably steady income, both in good times and bad. Loft Candy Stores, a New York-based chain of soda fountains, alone sold nearly 4 million Cokes a year. In 1932, Loft's president, the bottom-line-minded Charles Guth, approached Woodruff and Coca-Cola demanding a discount on the syrup for his fountains.
Guth thought that he should get a discount. But Coca-Cola was so high and mighty, they didn't give anybody discounts. So Guth bought Pepsi when it was in one of its perennial bankruptcies, and he started selling it in his soda fountains.
But with the Loft stores as its only outlet, it wasn't long before Pepsi was verging on bankruptcy once again.
At this point, he decided that maybe he hadn't done the best thing in bringing Pepsi Cola to Loft.
यहाँ पर distribution का problem है.
Swallowing his considerable pride, Guth went back to Woodruff and offered to sell Pepsi to him.
Coca-Cola said, you've got nothing, we're not interested. And as they say, the rest is history.
It was a blunder because he could have eliminated his principal competition for a very cheap price.
Woodruff had missed a golden opportunity to crush Pepsi before it became a threat. Worse, Woodruff's arrogance only
This is the whole Google versus Yahoo कहानी नहीं, जहाँ पे Yahoo completely missed the bus on buying out of Google. Similarly, I think Coca-Cola missed out the bus on buying out Pepsi.
and Guth's resolve. In 1934, all of America was in the grips of the Great Depression. Millions were out of work and money was tight. A nickel was a lot of money to depression-starved Americans. Guth came up with a plan to give people more for their money and keep his company afloat.
He managed to buy some old beer bottles, and beer bottles in those days had paper labels so that you could put on a new label for any brand you wanted. And he bought a lot of them for very little money. And he sold a 12-ounce bottle for 5 cents.
At that time, every other soft drink was being sold 6 ounces for a nickel. Within days, all the Pepsi Cola stock they had was gone. People loved the 12 ounce for a nickel. All of Pepsi's advertisement at that time was centered around a nickel. Twice as much for a nickel, America's biggest nickel drink.
A nickel was really a lot of money, and the fact that you could pay a nickel and get twice as much really influenced a lot of people to buy Pepsi Cola instead of Coca-Cola.
In just 6 months, Pepsi went from
ये भी प्राइस वॉर ही है नहीं, स्टार्टिंग से प्राइस वॉर ही है. एटलीस्ट पेप्सी तो अपनी तरफ से प्राइस वॉर ही कर रहा है.
bankruptcy to turning a $100,000 profit. Well, Pepsi's sales were still minuscule compared to Coke's, but Pepsi was alive. Down in Atlanta, the giant of the cola business was suddenly anxious. When we return, Coke and Pepsi battle it out in a grudge match for number one.
John Doc Pemberton. All wars will return on Modern Models.
As World War II raged in Europe, the slumbering giant of American industry awakened. Steel mills, aircraft factories, and shipyards sprang to life to support the war effort. But the war presented a serious challenge to Coke and Pepsi.
When World War II broke out, Coca-Cola was immediately confronted with the threat of sugar rationing that would probably cut its domestic sales by half.
While his management team was panicking, Woodruff seized the initiative.
He went off to Washington and tried to argue with the government and tell them that Coca-Cola was a wartime necessity, and to a remarkable extent, he succeeded.
Soon, millions of cases of Coca-Cola were being supplied to military training camps. But Woodruff had managed to do more than just secure the exclusive rights to sell soft drinks to servicemen. He dealt Pepsi a devastating blow as well.
Any Coca-Cola that went to the troops was exempt from sugar rationing, and Pepsi did not get this.
While Coke had unrestricted access to rationed sugar and other commodities, Pepsi struggled.
There was a bother in West Virginia during the World War II.
यहाँ पे सप्लाई चेन को लेकर के गेम हो गया पेप्सी के साथ.
Could not get enough sugar for Pepsi. So what he did is he also had a candy business. He melted down all his rock candy and extracted the sugar out of it for his Pepsi.
Coca-Cola, on the other hand, had full access to all the sugar they needed. Wherever American GIs went, from the North African desert to the jungles of the Pacific, Coca-Cola followed.
At the Coca-Cola Company, I remember a telegram that was framed and put there on the fourth floor offices, the executive suite. And it said, send 6 Coca-Cola bottling plants. Ike.
During World War II, American servicemen consumed 10 billion bottles of Coke. But Coke's support of the war effort was more than just racking up sales. It was the single greatest marketing coup in the company's history.
Coca-Cola provided the GIs with that taste of home. And it was there as they came back from battle, often at the very front lines. You had technical advisors, the Coca-Cola colonels, if you will, who were there to see that the bottling was done right. That was different from the product, I dare say, like Spam, that some GIs had less pleasant memories of.
The Coca-Cola became an icon to the American GI. What began as a mercenary business decision ended up taking on a life of its own, and the American GI came to have a devotion to Coke. It was like a letter from your sweetheart.
More time for play, of course, means more thirst still. The need for
Thanks to the devotion of a generation of servicemen, Coca-Cola entered the 50s feeling invincible. Woodruff and Coca-Cola all but turned their backs to the threat posed by Pepsi.
The contempt that Robert Woodruff and the other leaders of Coca-Cola had for Pepsi it's almost amusing. They called it the imitator.
We would refer to the competitor as the P-Cola. We have to look out for that cooler over here or over there or at that important supermarket or food store. P-Cola will make a run at us. P-Cola.
Woodruff and Coca-Cola had good reason to feel invulnerable. Since becoming its president in 1923, Woodruff had led Coke on a meteoric climb. The drink now had a worldwide presence, with annual sales approaching $1 billion. Woodruff had proven his worth to his father and to Coca-Cola stockholders, many of whom he made very rich. A single $40 share purchased in 1919 was now, in 1950, worth nearly $5,000. Secure in his dominance of the soft drink industry, Woodruff let the company coast along.
You had Woodruff refusing to change the things that had worked for him, and I think a lot of successful businessmen have that problem, but he insisted on having one price, the nickel, even as the cost of ingredients was going up. One product, Coca-Cola, no other flavors for the vending machines that were now popping up, and only one size of container, the old 6.5-ounce bottle.
But in the 50s and 60s, the soft drink business, along with the rest of the world, was rapidly changing. Companies were expanding and diversifying their products and marketing efforts. Pepsi was controlled not by one man like Woodruff at Coke, but by a conglomerate of CEOs, brand managers, and directors. As the soft drink industry grew, more and more products, flavors, and packages entered the market each year. Even a staunch traditionalist like Woodruff reluctantly had to follow suit.
Finally, in 1955, Woodruff allowed a bigger Coca-Cola, and eventually, like in 1961, they came out with Sprite, so they began to come out with other flavors.
There would be other changes too. The cola wars were escalating, and there was a new all-powerful weapon in the battle: television.
Say, want to have more fun? Then come on along and let's join the Pepsi crowd.
Trailing Coke in sales, Pepsi made full use of the new medium. Faced with the World War II generation's fanatical devotion to Coca-Cola, Pepsi simply ignored them, focusing on their kids instead.
Places to see, people to love, and Pepsi Cola is the one cola that belongs with every happy, hopeful moment.
We came upon the notion of, instead of talking about the product so much, let's talk about the consumer that uses it, the type of person that would buy or use this product. And it was what we at that time termed a necktie philosophy, meaning that if you look at a man's tie, you can tell something about him usually. I mean, it's right there. And it was true about what soft drink he would hold in his hand, that if he had a Pepsi Cola in his hand, chances are he would be less traditional. He might be more youthful.
It didn't take long for Coke to realize that if they ceded the youth market to Pepsi, eventually they'd run out of customers. Coke struck back with one of the most famous commercials ever produced.
The funny story behind that is that the president of the company at the time did not think that that ad was a very good idea. He thought it was a little too pacifistic, a little too treacly, too saccharine sweet. But he shrugged and he said, well, that's why we have an advertising department. So he gave a green light to it and it became an immensely popular song that I think captured something of a generational feeling.
Despite the success of Coca-Cola's extraordinary ad, it was too little, too late. Pepsi's market share continued to climb, and in 1975, Pepsi went for the jugular. They launched a massive ad campaign called the Pepsi Challenge.
We did legitimate take.
Pepsi's market share continued to climb, and in 1975, Pepsi went for the jugular. They launched a massive ad campaign called the Pepsi Challenge.
We did legitimate taste tests with all kinds of specifications on the freshness of the two products being tested, the temperature of the two products, and so forth, and alternating which one was tasted first and which one wasn't. And all through those tests, we learned that Pepsi, when it was not identified, was preferred.
By 1984, Pepsi had grown from Depression-era underdog to a vicious attack dog. Pepsi's market share now trailed Coke's by less than 3 percentage points.
Pepsi's sales were about equal to Coca-Cola. That's something that never occurred before. And in some markets, Pepsi had even pulled ahead.
After years of relentless and aggressive marketing, the imitator had finally caught up. In Coca-Cola's Atlanta headquarters, panic ensued. When we return, Coca-Cola stages a classic blunder. In the early 1980s, Coca-Cola was in trouble. Pepsi's relentless pursuit of the youth market and their highly successful Pepsi Challenge campaign had brought them to within a few share points of Coke's once insurmountable market dominance. Unbeknownst to the public and all but the highest of Coke management, the company began to tinker with the most guarded, most sacred part of Coca-Cola's empire, the formula.
The decision was made that they actually had to change the formula to make it a little bit more like Pepsi to fend off the competition.
The change would have been unthinkable if Robert Woodruff still held a tight rein on the company. But by the 1980s, Coca-Cola's aging patriarch was a fading relic, a mere shadow of the man who'd run the company for over 60 years.
I don't believe that Robert Woodruff in 1985 was capable of understanding much. He was 95 years old by then, of severely diminished capacity. He was virtually blind and deaf.
Running the company in Woodruff's place was Roberto Goizueta.
Roberto Goizueta, who was born in Cuba, had become the CEO and had announced early on that there were no sacred cows, there were no sacred formulas. He would do anything to be aggressive and to get this company going again.
To go, no one at Coca-Cola would dare admit it, more like the cola they'd ridiculed for years as the imitator.
They were in an awkward position. They couldn't say we're making it taste more like Pepsi, which is what they were doing. And they couldn't really explain why they were changing it. So they just said, well, it's new and improved.
Unshaken in his belief that new Coke was a superior product, Goizueta launched the new formula with a tremendous fanfare, inviting over 700 members of the press to the unveiling at New York's Lincoln Center. Across the country, premier parties trumpeted new Coke.
Try the new taste of Coca-Cola, and you too will like it, just as everybody here at Robert Woodruff Park enjoys the taste of Coca-Cola. Woo! Y'all come on down to the park. Whee!
Despite the dramatic unveiling, things quickly soured for Goizueta and new Coke.
I don't like it. Have you tried the new Coke?
Yes.
What do you think of it?
Don't like it. Very disappointed. I think we've lost the American tradition. The real taste is gone. It's not here.
What the Coca-Cola people had forgotten was how well they had succeeded with their advertising, how well they had made Coca-Cola a part of people's everyday lives.
Within a matter of days, Goizueta was rudely awakened to a fact that Candler and Woodruff had long known. Coca-Cola had an intensely loyal following.
It's not the real thing anymore.
Calls flooded Coke's 800 number. Newspaper editorials blasted the formula change, and new Coke's rollout parties in 45 cities turned into angry protests.
hundreds and thousands and ultimately tens of thousands of bitterly angry phone calls came in. And a lot of them were from people who didn't even drink Coca-Cola. It was just American citizens who thought that something familiar and important in their lives had been taken away from them without their permission.
They got these letters saying, I wouldn't be as upset if you burned the flag on my lawn. I wouldn't be as upset as if you told me God was dead. I wouldn't be as upset if you changed the American Constitution. I mean, this is they're changing the flavor of a soft drink. And it dominated the news for 3 months. It was unbelievable. And finally, and they had psychologists listening in on the 800 number line who said that these people sounded as if a family member had died. That was the way they felt.
We have planned the attack.
The angry
That is the power of one product on the whole generation. This is how pop culture seeps into your own life and becomes a part of your identity. Just a change in the formula of a drink that these people had cherished for years and years. एक छोटा सा चेंज लोगों को लगने लगा सब कुछ बदल गया है उनके हिसाब से, बिकॉज वो उनके आइडेंटिटी का पार्ट। जब आप किसी के आइडेंटिटी के साथ छेड़छाड़ करते हो तो बैकलैश तो आएगा ही। वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग।
letters poured in, and one message rang through, loud and clear.
There's no way. You're not taking my Coca-Cola away.
If Pepsi was the imitator, just what was New Coke? All the company's years of smug superiority came crashing down. Pepsi, of course, had a field day.
Pepsi very cleverly declared a holiday in celebration that announced that they had won the Cola Wars, let everybody off for a day.
The formula change boosted more than Pepsi's self-confidence. Pepsi's sales surged as well. Pepsi became the top-selling cola in the world. By July, Goizueta had had enough. The old formula was back, and soon, so was Coke's market share.
The news about the introduction of Coca-Cola Classic ran on the Dow Jones Wire at 3:18 p.m. yesterday.
Once Coca-Cola Classic came back, it was wildly successful. The same beverage that had been losing market share for 20 years started to gain it. So much so that many people think that they did this on purpose. There's this sort of folklore that the Coke guys did this whole New Coke thing, fiasco, as a marketing ploy because of what happened from it. Well, let me tell you.
ये बिल्कुल हो सकता है। कोका-कोला डेफिनेटली कर सकता है। No doubt about it.
It was not a marketing ploy. They screwed up. It was the marketing blunder of the century, but it came out well for them.
Today, Coke and Pepsi are locked in mortal combat for market share. And not just in cola. Both companies have expanded into multiple brands. Coke with Minute Maid, Sprite, Surge, and a multitude of others. Other Pepsi brands include Tropicana, Mountain Dew, and Slice. And then there are the myriad offsprings of their marquee products. Pepsi also owns Frito-Lay, the #1 snack food company in the world. In the mid-1980s, flush with cash, both companies went on a buying spree, expanding well beyond the beverage markets they dominated. Coke bought Columbia Pictures. PepsiCo bought Kentucky Fried Chicken, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut.
Coke bought Columbia Pictures.
Dominated. Coke bought Columbia Pictures. PepsiCo bought Kentucky Fried Chicken, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut.
Pepsi owns KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut. Of course, I mean, I'm sure you people would already know that. But point ये है कि diversification tactics में आप देखो ये product line के हिसाब से diversification नहीं है. They are taking over the icons or things which their TG is now consuming more. Movies, KFC, pizza. So जहाँ Pepsi खाने की तरफ गया, Coca-Cola entertainment की तरफ गया. So Coca-Cola is going aspirational. Pepsi is trying to see जो लोग पी रहे हैं वो खाना भी खा रहे होंगे. They're basically going after the food bit.
They both since divested those spin-offs, sticking to what they do best, marketing beverages. The cola wars continue unabated. A worldwide struggle that's more than just a war for market share, more than a mere battle for the consumer's spare change.
The passions of cola loyalty come from all of the psychology of the advertising and marketing that we grow up with. Families are Coke families or Pepsi families. It's almost like North and South. And what the product actually tastes like is only a small part of that. You can't really separate the psychological impact of the trademark and what it evokes in you from the actual product itself.
To some, the cola war is about far more than simple rival companies or rival flavors. It's an epic battle between two competing ideologies, between right and wrong, or good and evil.
I believe that Coke and Pepsi together, this cola war they've been in for decades now, actually help each other sell an awful lot of product. I think they've been good for each other. So had Coke ended up with a monopoly on the cola beverage, what would have happened, who knows?
This is one of the very interesting bits. ये उतनी खास documentary वैसे थी नहीं because ये काफी ऊपर से touch करके चली गई and I think this is one of those TV based documentaries. If you guys know of any better documentary that we should review around Pepsi and Coke, please let me know down in the comments below and we will see you guys in the next one.